Welcome. I'm Kevin Miller. This is a podcast for your personal evolution. In this episode, what type of work truly inspires you? Now, this is not about working at your passions or even, as my dad, Dan Miller, was famous for, finding the work you love. This is more about the actual tasks and activities you're engaging with in whatever you are doing. You can think about it like a sports team, like a football team. They're all playing the game, but they aren't all playing the same position. So in the daily work that you and I do, what position most excites you? What role are you best suited to fulfill? You could be working in a field that's a perfect fit for you, but you're in a role that is not. Conversely, you could be working in a field that you might not care a whole lot about, but you're in a role that's really great for you. So I'm bringing back a conversation I had with Jonathan Fields. He's host of the incredibly popular podcast, The Good Life Project. I've had Jonathan on my podcast multiple times, and I just appreciate the spirit and energy that I experienced from him. He developed a test of sorts years back that will help you know what work role fits you best, where you will be the most inspired, or as he calls it, what sparks you. It's free as well, totally free. You can go to sparketype.com, but it's got an E in the middle, sparketype.com. I mean, as an example, my primary spark type is maker. I like to make things, build things, start things. And while I do build some physical things here and there, most of my spark is in relation to building ideas, concepts, solutions to problems. My second spark type then is scientist, which is coming up with ways to make that idea happen. Well, it then showcases, of course, what is not your spark type. And this is not an excuse of what to do and what not to do necessarily, but to show you where you're best suited. So for me, I continually strive to remain in the roles where I am sparked and delegate the other areas of my work to people who are sparked in those areas and who will do a far greater and more efficient job than I will. Well, again, you can take the test for free on your own. Sparketype, sparketype.com. And you can connect with Jonathan Fields. I tell you, just wherever you're listening to this right now, go search for the Good Life Project. And hey, as you're about to hear some great information, if you want help actually applying it to your life with personal guidance, connect with me. I'd be honored to guide you to a great guide for you. Email me at kmiller@kevinmiller.co. All right, coming up next, my discussion with Jonathan Fields and what work really sparks us. Let's evolve ourselves today. So, Jonathan, I wanted to talk to you about, the impetus of this new book, Sparked, and the Spark Type assessment. However, understanding now the different types and that you're a maker and a scientist, I understand that you probably just moved on to other things, and so we don't have a whole lot to talk about today. Am I right?
Man, I am still very much in the process of creation and evolution within this body of work. So I'm still fully in it for at least the near future.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try to do justice to talk about a lot of it, but I'm going to have a really hard time not just talking about myself and my own type, especially because I happen to have the exact same profile as you.
No kidding.
So I'm a maker and a scientist. And I did that, I read about it, but then, of course, took the test. Second day, got the email talking about the maker. Today, got the email about the scientist. And yeah, interesting, they're so similar. I mean, it feels like you're kind of, so I'll just focus on you. You're kind of true blue. You like to create things, and you like to make and create things, and you like to make, you're pretty solid across it. How similar is that, where you find people are real common with their primary and shadow as opposed to a balance maybe? It doesn't feel so balanced. Yeah.
I think it really depends on each individual. You can look at, so the way that it works is, you take the assessment and then you get assigned what we call a primary sparketype, which I see as your strongest impulse for effort. The thing you get up in the morning and you would work really hard at for no other reason than the way it makes you feel. And then there's this other thing that you're referencing that I call the shadow sparketype. And you can look at that as one of two ways, as your runner-up, and that could be a close runner-up or a pretty far away runner-up. And we usually have a pretty decent sense of what that is for us. But there's often a more nuanced relationship. And that is that very often we do the work of the shadow in order to be able to do the work of our primary at a higher level. So this shows up differently for different people. So, we're both maker scientists. That's how we would phrase it. Maker primary, scientist shadow. So I like maker/scientist. And the way it shows up in my life, and maybe I'm curious actually how it shows up in yours too, is I open my eyes in the morning and it's all about the process of creation. I want to have actual output. I want to go from idea to something. That is the thing that has fueled me for as long as I can remember from the youngest days of my life. Along the way, of course, I'm going to stumble. I'm going to hit roadblocks. There are things I'm going to need to they're burning questions or puzzles that I need to figure out in order to sort of push through the process of creation, because it's never a linear, process. So I'll sort of swap on my scientist hat, and the scientist impulse is all about figuring out things, the burning questions, puzzles, quandaries, problems. And then once I sort of get the things solved, I'll immediately drop back into this generative mode of make the thing. But you're right in a really interesting way that there's a really powerful similarity between the maker and the scientist. And that's this, that they both spend the vast majority of their time living and working and investing effort in the presence of uncertainty and questions. So the maker, it's all about making ideas manifest, something from nothing, which means you often don't know if that something is possible to be created. You're kind of, you're pushing through and you're taking action, you're investing energy and resources. And oftentimes you have no idea if the thing that you have in your mind, like the vision of it, is actually possible, or if it's going to look anything like what you actually think it's going to look like. So you're living in the question, which is really uncomfortable for most people. And the same thing with the scientist, because that is, in fact, your primary impulse, to live in the question. In fact, for the scientist, very often, it is about, finding the answer, like solving the puzzle. Whether something gets made out of that or created that is left behind isn't so important. It's about the question. But both of them spend a vast majority of time living with high levels of uncertainty and question. And you have to develop the skill of making decisions, taking actions, allocating resources when you're in this state of a lot of uncertainty. And that can be really hard for a lot of people, including makers and scientists. Just because you have the impulse to be there doesn't mean that you're necessarily resourced from a mindset standpoint to find a place of equanimity and calmness and to be okay when you're in that space. And that can sometimes be a shared tension between both of those impulses.
The term of certainty jumped out to me, Jonathan, because it's literally been something that I have been kind of on a soapbox with lately, and just kind of feel the, hairs raised in the back of my neck with certainty. I mean, we're in a culture right now where everybody wants to, say with certainty their opinion, their viewpoint, what reality is. And I literally found myself so often going, I am less certain today on most everything than ever. Now, it doesn't mean I'm doubtful necessarily. It doesn't mean I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful, and whatever. But to say I'm certain, and I love the uncertainty. So part of where I put, as I was learning about the spark types, that I put this towards was wood making. So that's a hobby of mine. I do that. I live up in the forest. I've got a wood mill. And I do not think of myself as a carpenter. I'm not really that good, but I can kind of make functional art, really cool bunk beds for my kids and a deck that's pretty good. But what I've realized is if you give me a blueprint and give me the materials, there's no joy at it all. Just somebody else do it. I love having the raw materials and just having an idea of, we really need a roof over the front door, and just coming out and standing there and looking at it and figuring something out. And it'll wake me up in the morning. If I wake up at night to go to the bathroom at 2 a.m., then all of a sudden I'm thinking about this roof. I don't need to, it's not pressing. It's just for fun. And yet that's where I am in the uncertainty of figuring out how to do this. So you're looking at the types. It literally did what you guys talk about. Is I felt like, oh, somebody knows me. And what I loved in reading it that I want everybody to hear is realizing it showed me the transferable propensities. It showed me the propensities within myself that are transferable to anything and everything that I do. And that made sense. So for somebody out there who's looking for, gosh, what job, what business, whatever, holy smokes, here's where you'll figure out where you're going to flourish. And if you're not participating in these types, where you're going to languish. That was beautiful.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. When I was, we spent years developing the types and then building the assessment and testing and validating it. And when I finally sat down to write the book, you always have to ask, if, for me at least, if I'm committing to writing a book, it's a huge amount of time and energy to put into a project, which means I'm saying no to a whole bunch of other things. So when I sit down to write it, I ask myself, what is my intention? What is my intention in writing this? And what is the metric that I'm really looking? How will I know that I feel good about this, before anyone even reads it? And for me, what I kept saying to myself is, it's a little bit of a weird question, but I would ask myself, what do I want for readers when they read this and when they interact with the whole body of work? And I kept going back to this phrase in my head. I kept thinking to myself, I want people to feel seen. And I kept writing to that. And I'm drawing at this point from 2.5 decades of research and experimentation and service and consulting, and now over 500,000 people through an assessment with 25 million data points. So there's a lot to draw from, right? And you can hear, by the way, I'm in New York City still for a short while.
I literally am used to that. If I have somebody on the show from New York City, we are going to have a siren in the podcast.
100%, 100%. So the question for me was, am I writing in a way where somebody who's reading this, where there's something that literally will land on a visceral, embodied level, they'll feel it physically, like I feel seen. Like there is something about me that maybe I haven't even seen it in myself. I haven't seen myself this way. And it feels like you're understood, you're seen, you're heard, you're held. And that this thing, this impulse that you've always known is there, and for so many people they've stifled, is valid. And then you have the language to then turn around and share that with other people and then ask them the same thing. Like, I want to do this work too, so we can see each other at a different level. And then what you just said, what you sort of like wrapped around to, is so powerful too. And I'm glad it actually landed with you, which is this notion that, we spend so much time looking for sort of the surface level job or team or company or industry. And sometimes we find that thing and it gives us that feeling that we want, like we're fully alive and activated. Most of the time we don't. That's what the research bears out. Even though it's slightly better, it's really rare. But even when you do, at some point that job is going to end. And then when you go on to the next thing, you won't understand the deeper impulse, the deeper fundamental nature of the work that gave you that feeling beyond the job title. So you'll go looking for the same job title in a different company. And very often it's not the same actual thing. And you won't feel that thing and you'll wonder what's wrong. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with the setting? What's wrong with the job? So part of what I've been trying to do is go deeper and really understand what is that deeper impulse for effort? Because once we understand it on that level, then like you said, it gives us a certain amount of freedom. We can look for that and find it in so many different domains, jobs, like companies, teams. So it gives us a lot of autonomy when we understand what's actually happening at a deeper level. And that's kind of where I've really been focusing a lot of my work.
Well, here it again, you took your type. So you created this thing. You took your type. You came out as a maker. And it really stood out to me when I went to your website, jonathanfields.com. What's it do? It says right there, front and center, I make things that move people. I literally thought about that, Jonathan, for my own ventures of saying that is what I do. I've known that for a long time. I've had, from my wife to my business partners to whatever, they know as well. My favorite thing is an idea, a possibility, and a blank sheet of paper. That's it. And I love the framework. Of course, once the framework's done, I'm kind of done. I'm ready to go.
Like, you tap out. You're like, okay, so where's the next thing? Like, where's the next blank piece of paper? And that is such a similar story with makers. I mean, it's sort of like once it's time to sort of like move into incremental growth, systems, process, scale, that's amazing for people of other types. But like the maker, that hyper generative something from nothing stage tends to end. And you're kind of like, okay, it's cool. I'm proud of what I did. And it's almost like you bless it on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so again, I love the concept of, I've got older kids like you, and as they look at whether it's a job, a career field, or whatever, I mean, we can look at, let's just pick some of the big ones out there, lawyer, doctor, architect, accountant, whatever, to know their type, to know that thing. Because I really took it as a kind of an activity, a pulse of what am I going to be engaged with? So for me, am I going to be, if somebody offered me a job or be a part of a business or whatever, what is the role that I'm going to be engaged in, and what am I going to be doing? Am I going to be able to make? Am I going to be doing, the scientific stuff, looking, figuring out how to do this thing or not? Otherwise, we're in trouble. So for my kids or for anybody listening out there, if you're looking at this role, like you talked about, what is the activity you're going to be engaged in day in and day out? And I love that because, man, I have so many interests. I'm sure like you, so many interests, but I look at those and go, would I like to, like, let's take woodworking. Would I like to do that 8-10 hours a day? No. It's a fun hobby and a fun outlet, but I don't. My other love is a passion is just be outdoors on a trail, running, riding. I mean, I love, it's one of the greatest spices of my life. Do I want to do it day in and day out vocationally? Nope. No, I don't. So even the things that I enjoy, it really helped me look at what am I okay with? Honestly, man, I can sit at a computer and write and create pretty much all day long with those other things thrown in to give me juice. But that was what felt powerful. I feel like there's no kid that needs to leave high school without knowing their type and knowing this is what I'm going to have to go find a role that fulfills.
Yeah. It's fun to me that you referenced the woodworking a couple times now. So most of my making has been in the sort of like the digital space for the last 10 years. I mean, we've created also a lot of experience design. We ran an adult summer camp for 5 years, the last 4 days of every summer, where we'd have 450 people in a 160-acre sleepaway camp. So, we were designing this immersive experience. But most of what I've been making for a long time now has been non-physical.
Me
and
too.
I realized,
me too.
Yeah. But it's interesting because it seems like you're okay with that. What I've started to realize recently is that I'm actually not.
Wow.
So I am really drawn. There's something in me that is really drawn to the physical process of creation, like the actual physical objects. So for me, 3 years ago, I set aside a month and I kind of vanished away. I drove out to rural Pennsylvania. I was living above this partially renovated roadhouse where you'd look out the window and you just see, like cows and fields. And downstairs, it was the upstairs of a roadhouse of a luthier, a guitar builder. And I spent a month working with him sort of like as a trainee while we worked side by side. And he walked me through the process of building by hand an acoustic guitar in his workshop, from raw wood all the way through to finished project. We worked 13-hour days with a single 40-minute break. I was, like dog tired by the end of every day, but I was more nourished and fulfilled than I think I have been in a few decades. And
wow.
I realized that for me, there's been like something that's a little bit missing. I mean, I get to make amazing things and it's really fulfilling, but at the same time, I was like, I couldn't put my finger on it. There was something that wasn't quite right. And what I realized was it's the process of physical making, actually working with my hands with physical objects. That is my highest expression, where I sort of like am most fulfilled, most satisfied by it. So I'm now working on ways to figure out how to get back to that more. I'll never walk away from creating media and podcasts and audio and video and writing. But at the same time, I've actually reconnected with the fact that the physical process for me is really, really powerful and necessary in my life.
Okay, so that's an interesting question or an interesting perspective that I'll put at you. So let's say that. Let's say we take you and me. we're both come out with maker scientists. So very similar in the endeavors that we want to engage in. And now you just made a distinction between, let's just call it electronic and physical. Because most of my time is in front of a computer creating content, whether it's podcasts, and I'm writing a book now, and, even business plans. I mean, it's happening, online, and it's these, right. And really even in the information stuff, because my businesses don't generally involve a physical product necessarily. So you have been as well. Then we both have these physical outlets, and you're saying you're realizing that you want more physical, and I'm looking at it and going, I kind of have a finite amount there. I'm not. Yeah. And we want to put ourselves, I think the propensity then is we're going to put ourselves there and say, okay, so Jonathan's figured out he needs 80% of his making time in the physical. Kevin's figured out 80% in the electronic, and that's it. Okay. And we set ourselves there. The thing that I continue to bump up against is that legitimate, or because we want a black and white answer, right? Is that it? Or could we look and go, gosh, that's where we find ourselves currently. But what if after the next year, 6 months, year, 3 years, 5 years, and you now immerse yourself in the physical, is it possible you could say, gosh, I don't know, man, I feel like I kind of scratched that itch. I really want to get back into the electronic space. Is that viable, possible, or is it? Well, but for people to look out there, because I tend to want to say, look, be open to seasons and cycles instead of us labeling ourselves, and this is what it is for eternity. What do you think?
Yeah, and actually, I completely agree with that. To me, what we're seeing, and this is my take right now, and wearing the scientist hat, I always have to hold myself open to the possibility that, enough data will come in that, there's an evolution of thought. But here's where I am right now. To me, the underlying impulse, the fundamental impulse to create, what we're seeing across most people is that stays fairly consistent for life, barring really major traumatic change or really, really big things that happen in life that literally rewire your brain. But the way that it gets expressed in any given moment over a period of life, like you said, cycles or seasons may evolve. You may find yourself really drawn to one medium or one mode of creation for a window of life. And it just feels like it's amazing. And that may actually consume you for your entire life. I have friends that started painting when they were 6 and never stopped, and they have no desire to ever work with any other form of creation. And then I have friends where it's been an evolutionary process where they started physical, and maybe then they started coding when they were in their teens and they absolutely loved it. And then they got exposed to hardware. And then, because the coding led them to this different aspect of the creation process. And then they got really into actual, the hardware side of creation. And then maybe later in life, they hit their 60s and they want to start writing. And so my sense is the underlying impulse stays fairly consistent, but the way that it is expressed can be a blend at any given time. It can evolve as like an intense focus on one channel for a season. To me, that is entirely unique to every individual, and certainly can change and evolve over time.
Do you feel in your research and in the utilization of the spark types that people are generally able to tap into what is natural and true to them, as opposed to finding that some people are pretty removed from it because of, I'm always interested in the nature versus nurture discussion, and natural versus environmental. So, I grew up in a home, all I knew was entrepreneurship. My dad never worked for another soul. I had no concept, and I don't today. I've never done that. Now I have a bunch of kids, and we've had to address that as I put them into, they all do farmers market. We start them off in business early. Right. And then I'll never forget, my oldest son at one point said, I just don't know if it's for me. I really like more direction than what I get in entrepreneurship. What he gets from me. I'm not I'm just, hey, there's the goal, you figure it out. And he's like, that doesn't work for me. And so I've had to look at that. And I think I hope I've done a good job of opening my kids up to not just my own brainwashing. But back to that, do you find that people sometimes have to struggle with the environmental programming that maybe pull them away from their nature, or are most of them pretty apt to come in and figure that out?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely rears its head in different ways. And also, what we've seen is it's different for different types. So I'll give an interesting example. The maker very often shows itself really early in life. And I don't think it's because it actually, arises any earlier than any of these impulses. I think it's because it's socially rewarded and introduced way earlier. So, you go to school in preschool or like even as a toddler, what do you do to keep yourself busy? Well, you give your kid crayons or toys or blocks to build with. So, the impulse to make is actually introduced to kids at the youngest stage and an observable way. So that happens, I think it reveals a lot faster than a lot of other people. But at the same time,
hey, Jonathan, man, if you can hear me, I'm going to pause us. Okay.
Yeah. So, what's really interesting is that some of these sparketypes tend to be rewarded and introduced at a really young age. So the maker, for example, from the youngest age, toddlers, what do we give them if we want to keep them busy or, do an activity with them? We color, we give them crayons, we give them blocks. Very often it's all wrapped around activities that revolve creation, making. But we don't really think of it that way. It's just what we do. So we give it to them and it keeps them occupied. And then when they start to build skill at that, we reward it. So it becomes this thing which is really rewarded at a young age. And then it starts to show itself a lot earlier. Now, on the other hand, we have a sparketype like the performer. Now, the performer's fundamental impulse is to enliven, animate, and energize an interaction, moment, or experience. When kids are really little, oftentimes this is noticed and it's channeled into the performing arts. They're going to sing and they're going to dance and they're going to put on a show for the family and then they're going to be involved in theater in school. But then an interesting thing happens. A kid hits high school and then they start to emerge out of that. And then all of a sudden the thing they love to do, the parents are like, oh, well, that's a really nice hobby. Or it's a fun thing to do on the side. And now it starts to get stifled. Or maybe even when they're like emerging from middle school, the parents start to get concerned that the kids are actually investing a little bit too much in it. And they start to think, well, I love my kid. I want them to be safe. I want them to be able to support themselves in the world. And so few people in the performing arts are able to sustain themselves that way. So let me kind of start to nudge them away from it. Yeah. And they start to inadvertently plant the seed that this is actually not a valid impulse. Right. So it gets pulled away and then even stifled or repressed often for decades after that. And the reason is not because it's an invalid impulse, but it's because societally or familiarly, we only see performing arts as the expression of it rather than saying, no, this impulse, you bring it to a boardroom, you bring it to a meeting, you bring it to a sales conversation, you bring it to so many different arenas and environments. It is fabulously valued and really well compensated and rewarded, but we tend not to expand out that way. We just see this one conduit and it scares us. So we often shut it down. So I think a lot of it is the impulses, I do believe, really the seeds get planted very early in life, but they tend to show themselves in different ways at different stages based on what we wrap around them culturally.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because even reading the book, Back to the Maker, I think most of the examples, at least the ones that I paid attention to, were more of what we talked about a minute ago, the physical aspect. And I was thinking, okay, this is me, but yeah, I spend most of my time over here. And electronic probably isn't the best overall terminology, but that's where I'm making things over here and ideas and opportunities as opposed to, wood or painting or whatnot. Is that either I missed it, or is there a place within the book or the online assessment where you do help people round out to say, okay, if you are a maven, for instance, which, I think that was the first one that was in the book. If you are that, here's kind of a breadth of where you could apply that. And I really like what you said too, to say, if you are X, culturally, we generally lump that all into this one place, like performer, that you're going to go into the performing arts. But let's look, you can expand that out. Does that happen on one of the platforms?
It does. So in the book, actually, there's an entire chapter called Spark Your Work, where we kind of walk you through this process where we say, okay, so here's your fundamental impulse or your set of impulses, right? Like your primary or shadow. But what does this look like in the real world? How do we get granular? Like, how do we actually know how this gets applied in the context of work? And when I say work, by the way, I'm using a broad umbrella here. This may be the thing you get paid for. It's really great when you can express this in a major way, doing the thing that earns your living. But I'm also talking about all the ways that we invest effort. It could be a primary role, maybe parenting, maybe caretaking. Yeah. It could be a devotion, like something that you do on the side. It could be a side hustle. So it's all the ways that we actually invest effort. Those are the things that I'm talking about. So when we get to that, there is a whole process in the book where we walk you through creating what I call your sparketype expression inventory, where we look historically at different categories and we start to tease out how have these things showed up historically, because that gives us breadcrumbs. It gives us a lot of specific hints about what we might look for moving forward in either reimagining our existing work, our existing job, or looking for something new. Like what do we know, like we really would need to be there. But I'm also really careful to make it super clear that this is not an all-inclusive list and it is a growing inventory. It's dynamic. It will keep expanding for life. When we look historically at these specific things, jobs, tasks, tools, processes that have given us this feeling that we want, they're great hints, but it's not the universe, because you could have, let's say, you have an opportunity presented to you, and it sounds really interesting, and it sounds like it could tick all the boxes for you, where you could do the work of your sparketype in a really big way, but you look back at that inventory of how it's shown up in the past, and you don't really see, what you'd be doing in this new thing and the things you've been doing in the past. I think it's really important not to say no to it just because you haven't had the experience yet that would let you know whether this, in fact, is a valid conduit for the expression of this impulse for you or not. So to me, we deconstruct it in the book, and I walk you through a whole process of getting specific. And that is super helpful in looking back at your current job and looking at new opportunities and getting a much better feel for what to start to say yes or no to. But at the same time, always super important to be open to experimentation. And if it's not clear, to almost say yes, not necessarily because you feel like you have to succeed at this new thing or it's an absolute yes, but yes to let me run this experiment and see if this is actually something that will give me what I need. And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. But I love the idea of sort of like framing things as experiments.
Yeah.
Because then you can't fail, because you're always going to learn from that experience, whether this is something that activates the impulse or not.
Okay, it's interesting. I'm thinking on a different tangent here as you say that. I had 6 of my kids take this, Jonathan, and my wife and a couple close friends. I've actually got their list here. We were talking about it, and we'll be digging in more. But it's interesting as you talk about some of the roles, and you mentioned a second ago, parenting, whatnot, to take this and say, because you say in the book, or you say in the whole platform, this is your muse is kind of your work impulse. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say that. It is the impulse to exert effort. So you could, the impulse for work, to invest yourself in work. Yeah.
Okay, to say, so if I look at that and go, again, for me, so maker, scientist, that is where if I'm going to be the fullest expression of myself at my full capacity, capability, I'm going to be best served to be participating in those roles and activities for the majority of my days. I mean, so if I say that. So it's interesting if I took myself as a single person, which I can't really remember anymore, and let's say I'm doing this, and then to say, okay, you're going to get married, buy a house. How is that going to integrate into that? And now even further, you're going to have a child, and I'm going to let's say I won't do gender stereotyping, but let's say, if you've got a couple, they're going to have a child, and say, okay, well, who's going to be if there's going to be a primary caregiver as opposed to, daycare or whatever, who's going to stay home with it? How is that going to fit? And that's interesting to think of as a maker. So as a guy, I didn't have to deal with that because my wife had the baby. She's nursing the baby. I just started working more and we went those stereotypical directions. But if I had stayed home, how would that have fleshed out with my desire to make and create when I'm doing the day-to-day monotony of child caring?
Yeah, I think that the broader question you're asking is, can you take any one of these impulses and fit them into basically any type of job or role, or are certain impulses only suited for certain jobs or roles? And the answer is the former. You can take this and basically figure out. So let's take childcare for you, right? Most people think of that as the vast majority of it is it's service oriented. You're constantly in service of your child, of your baby, and it is absolutely a ton. Now, if you were a maker and you wanted to play that role and you want it to feel really good for you, and assuming, yes, like a big part of our reward here is the nourishment of developing a relationship with the child and the bond. And that's amazing. So let's sort of take that off the table because that's kind of a part of it all. Now, how would you bring your maker impulse to make that experience really nourishing beyond that, right? Well, you could do all sorts of things with that kid to start to create things for them. So maybe you're co-creating with them once they become a toddler and they actually have the ability to work with you, to play and make things together. But maybe, and we have actually seen this done, maybe you're a woodworker and you decide, I'm going to literally build the crib by hand, and I'm going to make an environment for my child. I'm going to make a whole play world for my child to navigate through. Yeah. I'm going to create all sorts of things for them to interact with. I'm going to create moments of, I can turn that Jones into an experiential creation process also. So the notion is, like, you're right. Like, we tend to wrap our heads around these stereotypical tasks that are involved in a particular job or role, not realizing that we can basically reimagine them in any way possible to allow that impulse that exists in us to really shine through.
So you can reimagine them, and yet my propensity with a business. So let's say I'm going to go open a coffee shop because I love coffee. Actually, be a coffee wine bar because I like both ends. So I'm going to do that, and we look at the roles within that. We are going to, hey, if you've got a cook, you've got a barista, you've got a server, you've got a greeter, you've got a hostess, you've got somebody running the book, somebody do that obviously, as we look at the different types, there are some that are going to be naturally, I have a better propensity to fulfill those roles.
Yeah. So I would say yes and no, actually.
Okay.
I think we tend to conventionally assign roles because we make those assumptions.
Okay.
But let's look at the example you just used, a restaurant, right? Let's talk about the role of a server, So we would just maybe automatically assume that somebody who's been doing this their whole life, somebody who says they love that job, and they can't wait to get to the restaurant, that must be somebody who has this impulse. Let's say one of the impulses is what I call the nurturer. And that's all about lifting people up, taking care of people, making them feel held, right? So there would probably be a logical assumption that somebody who does that job and has done it for years and really loves it and feels nourished by it beyond the paycheck, they must have that impulse. Like, that's got to be the central thing that aligns really well with that particular job. But in fact, that wouldn't be right. I would guess that some people, in fact, do have that impulse. In fact, it's one of the stories in the book is somebody who spent 15 years waiting tables. But at the same time, you might also have the impulse for being the scientist, let's say, right? So you might, like, the thing that might really, really, really make you light up is like, okay, so I have a table of 8 people here. How do I craft the experience so that it is the most magical thing that they've ever had in their lives? How do I actually get encyclopedic about understanding for every appetizer, for every entree, for every dessert? I know exactly what to pair that with. And I know whose thing on one person at the table goes with the other thing in a really powerful way. And because I want to earn the best possible living, how can I run a series of experiments where I change the way that I present, I change the way I make offers, I change the language that I use, I change the sequencing of what I do and the recommendations I make in order to optimize how much I'm going to get tipped. So now I'm wearing the scientist hat. I'm figuring out all of these cool, complex problems. I'm solving the puzzles. Or maybe my impulse is the sage, which is all about awakening insight, transferring. I want people to know more stuff. So I'm going to tell them when they ask me, hey, tell me about this dish, I'm on fire. Yeah. Right? Because I'm going to tell them, well, we get this, we get this salmon from this small place in this tiny little island. Let me tell you how it's raised. I'm going to tell you the story about the salmon. Then I'm going to tell you how it pairs so beautifully with this other thing, because the acids here work with the fats here, which work with the salt here, because I want you to know. I know all this stuff and I'm so excited to share it with you. And that makes it a magical experience. So I think we need to pull back from those assumptions that we just traditionally associate with roles and say, no, in fact, yes, those are the assumptions that we very often lead with, but pretty much any one of these impulses can be really fully expressed and activated in almost any job or role. We just might have to really reimagine how we do it.
Did you ever wait tables?
No, I washed dishes for a short amount of time, and that was it.
Well, because I did during some of my initial cycling years on my way to being a pro cyclist. I waited tables at high-end restaurants, and I actually liked it. Because I think, and I hadn't thought about it in this context, and I think I looked at every table was uncertain. I didn't know the people. I didn't know their type. Were they going to be this type? Did they want this type service? Did they want to interact? Did they want me to be professional? Do they want me to sit down at the table or act like a concierge? And to figure that out, there was some fun in that, because I was thinking about how to nuance this relationship to serve them the best, so I get the best tip. It was pretty selfish in that, but yeah.
Yeah, and you could actually wear both the maker hat and the scientist hat, because you're figuring out something really cool and interesting, and it's always different with every single table and all the people. And at the same time, you're making a moment. There's a creation process that's unfolding.
What was it, Jonathan? I mean, because there's not a lack of resources that cite, hey, we can help you figure out where you are best predisposed for a job. I mean, we've had those in, even personality profiles 30 years ago and whatnot. Take the profile and you come out as XYZ in your personality profile. That probably fits, this big list of jobs or whatnot. Obviously, not to diss anything that's out there, but you saw a need. And first, just from a personal standpoint, I'm curious with you, especially with a similar spark type here. So prior to the question I just asked there, to the answer you're going to give on what motivated you, was the motivation, did you see it as, man, I am passionate for people to know this and go do what they want? Or did you feel it as a burden of, I'm pained by what I'm seeing and I want to go serve that?
Yeah, it was more, it was probably a blend of both. One of the questions people have been asking me for pretty much my entire adult career is, what should I do with my life? And when they ask me in particular, what they're really asking is, it's always mostly in the context of work. How do I find and do work that nourishes me, that makes me come alive? And of course, I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of research, both in the world of academia, in the world of spirituality, in the world of business, and seen a lot of models and frameworks and, peer-reviewed, published research, and seen a tremendous amount. Like you said, there's no lack of assessments or typing tools that are out there and have been out there for many years. And the last thing I wanted to do was invest years of my life in creating this new body of work and these new tools and ideas if the question was already answered, if the tools were already out there to help people. But I kept coming back and I kept saying, there's some great tools out there and they're answering a lot of different questions. And very often they're more generalized personality tools, which are great. They're about relational styles, which is great to know. They're more broad-based, which is really useful, or they're super specific. But this, the VIA strengths or StrengthsFinder come to mind, which is, VIA is more about character traits and StrengthsFinder is more about skills and talents. And they're all great and they add pieces of the puzzle. But what I wasn't seeing were ideas and tools that answer like the most basic question, which is, what is the underlying impulse for effort for all of this? Like, what wakes you up in the morning and makes you want to do this? Because if we can figure that out, if we can identify it, we can map it, and then we can align the way that we invest effort in the world, the way we work, then not only do we feel a whole lot better on a personal level, but work outcomes start to magnify. Like motivation becomes much less of an issue, because if you're aligning most of what you do with the thing that you want to do anyway, even if you didn't get paid to do it, it's not going to be a whole lot of friction getting you to wake up in the morning and do it. So there was sort of like, there were different meta levels of motivation for me to invest myself in this. And I think a lot of what's out there in the market in terms of other typing tools and indexes are awesome and powerful, and a lot of ways complementary. I'm a huge fan of just investing in different insights and different tools so we can come at the process of self-awareness from different angles and really just keep knowing ourselves better.
I grew up in a home with parents who were very open to the biblical perspective. There's a verse, train up a child in the way that they are bent, not in the way that you want them bent, but that they are naturally bent. So I grew up in that. I had that, maybe one of the greatest privileges of my life that I give credit to. I've never had a more, I said this at lunch with a friend yesterday, Jonathan, in regards to what I want for people. I've never known a morning that I woke up and I would have rather just kept sleeping, that I did not want to get out of bed. And we're, as you know, man, we are in a time right now where one of the most rapid chronic illnesses that we're dealing with is diseases of despair. Depression and literal suicide is one of the fastest growing areas. People that don't have a reason to wake up in the morning. And you said it just a second ago, and you cited it in the book, that when you type in, what was it? What should I do with? No, it was just what should I do? I did it. You had it in the book. So I went and tried it. So I went onto Google and I typed in, what should I do? First thing that came up in the little smart reader, whatever there was, with my life.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. I mean, that's daunting.
Yeah. I mean, it tells you that this great existential question has not gone away. And it also tells you, and this was a big part of why I invested so much energy in this work, is that told me that while we have amazing tools and ideas out there, we're still not getting to the source.
Agreed.
And I'm not saying that I have this, the one thing that will figure out every answer for every person, but at least, I'm working on creating ideas and tools that maybe get a certain amount of people a lot closer to it. You still have to do the work and you still have to tease out, what does this look like? But I mean, those questions are still there. And the stats on work, even before the last 18 months, the stats on work and engagement and meaningfulness and purpose have been relatively disastrous.
I was going to say worse than ever. Yeah, with whatever resources we may think we have, it's worse than ever. No different than with whatever knowledge and understanding we may think we have of health and wellness. We are literally more overweight and sicker than ever. So, and I keep preaching that because people hear lifespan. Oh, we're living longer than ever. We're existing. Our heartbeat is, but our health span is shorter than ever.
Yeah.
You on Instagram, I saw a post, I think it was recently, and it was kind of your own little label. It said maker, scientist, dad, husband, lead architect behind the sparketypes, and fueled by dark chocolate. Which, if I didn't love you before, man, dark chocolate is it's another pillar of my life. So I'm with you there. And also the word that stuck out though was architect. I've not given, just like maker and scientist, I haven't really given those focus in my life. I haven't been super aware, but the architect one keeps coming up. My brother's a brand, my brother, Jared Angaza, he's a brand specialist. And he came up with that with me really in recent years. He says, gosh, architect keeps, coming up, but I still hadn't grabbed onto that. So it was interesting. As a maker scientist that you had that, because I feel like I need to embrace that more. That fits me. Do you find, is there for each type or each pairing, I guess we need to say, often not to confine it, but I think I need to be in a place, whatever I'm doing, of architecting. Do you find that most people should be able to find something that's a little more applicable? Because maker is hard for me to take. If I'm going into the worldwide job search and go, hey, I'm a maker, hire me. okay, that's a little different. But if I say I need to be architecting, not an architect, as you would say, don't put it just, I don't have to go be an architect, but I need to be architecting, that most people should be able to embrace. I need to be managing. I need to be administrating. I need to be leading if I'm going to be in my best place.
Yeah, I think so. And that's, so what you were referencing is actually my bio, I think, on Twitter or on Instagram or something. It's sort of like the same thing. It's like dad, husband, podcaster, lead architect of sparketypes, and yes, fueled by dark chocolate. I'm pretty sure that that's my blood type.
Me too.
But yeah, I think we do tend to want a common language beyond sort of like this fundamental thing. I mean, that's a lot of the reason that the book exists, to be honest with you, is because I wanted to actually be able to go deeper into it and say, okay, so this is on a more granular level. Like this is kind of like the language that different people use. This is how it shows up in different ways and different stories and different parts of life. And with radically different sweep of humanity also, But yeah, and it's not necessarily something that you put on your resume, but knowing that it's important to you, I think is really useful when you're trying to figure out what to say yes or no to.
Would you say, so if you take somebody's type, which gosh, I want to point out to people that it's in the back of the book. I think it's in the appendix. I really appreciated you took literally every pairing of primary and shadow and showed the percentage of, would you say the populace, or at least the percentage of people who've taken it?
Yeah, I would say the percentage of people who've taken the assessment, just there's about 500,000 people who've taken it so far. And I don't say the general public because you're clearly going to get some numbers that are a little out of balance because there's going to be a bit of bias in everything that we all do. Like who shows up to take an assessment in the first place? Probably there's going to be an overbalance of mavens in there because they want to know everything, including more about themselves. That said, we've done enough of this work with organizations and teams where they're actually not voluntarily taking it. They're sort of like it's assigned as part of, an engagement or consulting thing. And we still see like pretty similar prevalences even in different groups. But yeah, we listed all of the pairings in the back of the book because I just thought it was really fascinating to see them.
I did too. And I honestly, maybe this is part of our type as well. I like to see myself as being, different and rare and whatnot. And actually, I looked at it and I thought, it's actually not the most different, rare out of those things. There's a lot of them.
It is not.
It is not. So I'm more normal than I would like to think. Okay. But when I look at that, and say, okay, I am a, maker scientist on that. For me to be, if I can use the word, fulfilled in my day-to-day work, life, task, whatever, would you say that you find that if I'm going to, because most of us are not going to be able to spend 100% of our time in there. So if I'm a painter, can I spend 100%? I mean, no, you're going to have actually have some personal hygiene. You might have to pay the bills. You got to do some business stuff, or at least delegate that stuff to have somebody. So back to that question, where would you say is a healthy percentage of your time? So for you, Jonathan, that you would say, I focus on creating a lifestyle to where I'm spending X amount of time in that type.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question and one that I've gotten a number of times. And so I've spent some time thinking about it. And I think my pat answer in the early days would have been, well, like the majority of your time. But I think I've kind of pulled away from that because what I've realized over time is that I'm not you. I'm not somebody who lives a profoundly different life than me. I don't have the same constraints, limitations, concerns, privilege, lack of privilege, lifestyle, needs, demands, hopes, aspirations. And my sense is, those things all affect how much we need to be able to express this impulse to feel okay. To me, it's more of a spectrum. Basically, the more, the better. But also at the same time, if you're living in a way where, you have a deeply held value of sustaining and supporting a family, and you're working two jobs, and you're maybe a sole provider, and then you've got parents who are relying on you or people who are relying on you. In addition to that, you may be in a point where you're sort of saying to yourself, okay, so I need to do what I need to do to put food on the table and to make sure everything is okay. And there's a certain amount of deep fulfillment and satisfaction you get just from knowing that you're doing that you're aligning your actions with your values. And that's really important to people, and then we go beyond that and say, okay, so from a personal level of fulfillment, for me to feel a sense of meaningfulness and expressed potential and energy and excitement for what I'm doing and lose myself and flow more and have a broader sense of purpose, both in the moment and more broadly in life, the more I can do this thing, the work of my sparketype, the more I get that feeling in addition to, parts of that being delivered by meeting my values. So to me, it's completely independent based on a person's unique circumstance and value set and the way that they might access these similar feelings. And I also think that sometimes we get part of that feeling through the work that we do and we get paid for, but we also get some of that feeling through the roles that we take on in life, through the devotions that we have, outside of the thing that we get paid for. And the amalgam of being able to express this impulse across all those domains, I think we have to look at all of that and not just say it has to come from our JOB or from the thing that actually, pays us.
Well, I appreciate that and have experienced that. Asking that question of the percentage, it's taken me a long time, Jonathan, to realize my own need to take a break from being a maker and a scientist. It's been a while ago, but I realized that in my terminology at the time was I'm addicted to production. And I realized that when I saw posts from friends that were playing and realized I wasn't with them because I'm the guy who often says no, because I'm often over here producing and I've forgotten how to play. I didn't really, what do I do to play? I produce. Even in my hobbies, I'm producing. In my workouts, I'm pushing. I don't know how to, and it was Randy James, co-host of one of my other, my True Life podcast and business partner. And he said, you're gonna have to do the hard work of relaxation. And it's now we've kind of flipped it on don't just sit there, do something, to don't just do something, sit there. And that's my own medicine. And I find in doing that, it's not my go-to joy. I'm learning, I'm growing in it, kind of like a meditation thing. But taking a break from it helps me come back and do it better.
Yeah, so agree with you. I think there's a lot of things we need to learn over time.
Yeah, I do too. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but you do pick out 5 domains of being, sparked in essence: purpose, engagement, meaningfulness, expressed potential, and flow, which you mentioned a couple times, which I appreciate. I had Stephen Kotler on the show recently, who runs the Flow Institute. But as you pull those out: purpose, engagement, meaningfulness, express potential, and flow, where do you see us as I'm not going to say as a culture even, because we do have a biased demographic. People listening to this show and your show are a demographic. And I tend to refer to them as an aspiring populace. They're not listening to the next crime scene show for entertainment. They're listening to something here to try to better their lives. So for those people, even amongst us, this is what I'm going to call aspiring. Where do you, amongst those 5, see us most often lacking?
It's a really interesting question.
I'm always curious when I see that to go, gosh, where am I most prone to missing it?
My sense is, again, this is be a slightly unsatisfying answer, that it's going to depend on the individual. I don't think we can make sweeping generalizations. I think there is a profound, for the same reason that, you do that Google experiment, type in, what should I do? And for a lot of people, it finishes a sentence with my life, clearly. And that's related. That's an existential question that's related to meaning and purpose, and I think there's been a lot of questioning around, Why am I doing what I'm doing? Like, does this actually matter to me? Is it meaningful? Is it giving me a sense of meaning? Maybe I'll focus on that because, if you look at the classic midlife crisis or the existential crisis, an existential crisis can drop you to your knees and profoundly alter the course of your life.
Yeah.
An existential crisis is not a crisis of money. It's not a crisis of power. It's not a crisis of agency. It's not a crisis of relationships. It's not a crisis of prestige. It's a crisis of meaning. It's a crisis where you hit a point and you say, there's something in you that says, okay, does this matter? Do I matter? And do I want to keep feeling the way that I'm feeling or answering those questions in the way that I'm answering at this moment in time? And for a lot of people, the crisis happens when the answer is no to one of those things or not enough for me. So I think I'm going to sort of like focus around meaning because I do feel like that is a huge question on people's minds, especially now as we sort of like, are in a bit of a period of transition and emergence. And a lot of people are really realizing what got me here ain't going to get me there.
Jonathan, that's the one that I came to. That's the one that stuck out. I'm looking, it's literally page 3 of your book. And as I looked at that, it's you just have quick bullet points. It says meaningfulness, the feeling that what you do and who you are matters. And like you, I can look on the podcast reviews and ratings and see the kudos. I can look at the emails that I get today that from people who say, hey man, what you did or what you said helped me. I can hear my kids or my wife, testify to that. And yet there's still that nagging question when I sit back for me at 50 years old and go, am I really, do I matter? Is it really that meaningful what I do? Am I really providing meaning to people? And I guess I would have to say, maybe that's it. Maybe that there's something in there that even with a testimony, am I providing meaning in a way that is valuable to me, regardless of what somebody may say I did for them? Is it in the way that what would you say, that I perceive meaning? Is that fair?
Yeah. And I think that the subtext is a lot of people have this question scrolling through their mind, which is, am I doing the thing I'm here to do?
Yeah.
And of course, underneath that is, what is that thing? And I think fundamentally, that's the question I'm trying to get to with the entire body of work around the sparketypes.
Yeah. All right, man. I'm going to fall on the last part of the assessment, which is the anti, because that was, honestly, that was concerning to me. No, I'll go further. It was disappointing for me. Can I? You know what? You didn't share. I didn't see yours. What is yours?
Yeah, mine is the essentialist. And so the anti-sparketype is. Yeah. It's the type of work that tends to come least naturally to you. You feel the least impulse to embrace. And when you do it, it tends to empty you the most and require the greatest recovery. And that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. And it also doesn't mean that you haven't learned the skill of becoming really good at it and then feel the sense of competence and accomplishment that comes from actually doing that. And it also doesn't mean that, you don't care about other people. It just means that when you do it, there's something in you that requires a bit more energy to actually invest yourself in it, and also requires a bit more recovery when you do it. And that's okay. It's just, it means that you have to sort of acknowledge that. It's funny that you said that. I'm guessing your anti is either the nurturer or the advocate then.
Nurturer.
Yeah.
Nurturer.
So you are not the only one who sort of like has seen that and then, really been concerned about it. And so I've sort of like had this similar conversation with a number of people where it's not that you're a bad person. It's not that you don't care about people. It just tells you that there's something about your wiring where you get much more easily lost in process than you do service. And the challenge with that is that societally, we're told that that's not okay, that there's something wrong with you if that's the way you're wired. So we bury that, but in fact, it's completely fine. That's just the way that certain people are wired, and it also doesn't mean that you're not a good and a loving person and that, you haven't learned the skill and taken on, like all of the roles and jobs that would allow you to play that role for a lot of other people and make a really big difference. It just kind of tells you that it requires more energy from you and that you actually have to create the space to keep refilling that well of energy, maybe more than somebody else.
When you look at the word encouragement, that's always been one. I mean, oh my gosh, Zig Ziglar, he was the king of encouragement. And we often say encouragement, it costs you nothing. That's what that's a common terminology. Encourage people, it costs you nothing. And I've always wondered, because I couldn't quantify what did it cause me, but it is so unnatural for me. Did you ever see the movie, oh gosh, it was Will Smith where he's a superhero. Hancock.
No, I didn't see it.
He's a kind of a not a happy superhero, and in that they coach him to give encouragement, and it's just a funny scene of him coming down and then remembering and going, "Good job," and he has to like force it out. Good job. Well, that's a joke in my home because my kids know that I'm intentionally, I'll start to walk away from something done. I'll come back and I'll go, "Oh, good job." Why does that not come naturally to me? And I tend to feel ashamed of that somewhat. And so now to get this thing that my anti is nurture. I mean, who doesn't want to be a nurturer? It feels shameful. And I hope that I'm able to do that. And I want to talk, I'm going to talk with my family about that. But then to realize in doing that man, when we go down to a mission type effort, which we do in a Native American reservation, and my wife's her primary is nurture. So we go down there. There's no place I feel more incompetent, and I tend to feel bad about myself. I mean, that's got to be a danger of this when you look at your anti, especially depending on what it is. If you're an anti-performer, I think that's easy to say. Okay, fine, I'm not a performer. I don't want to perform. Fine, no harm, no foul. Some of them feel bad.
Yeah, there are these cultural overlays. That's why actually in the appendix of the book, I share something called the satisfaction spectrum about how all 10 of these types are laid across the spectrum between process and service. And that there has been this culture of shame around people who are just more innately satisfied through process than through service. And it's wrong, because these are the impulses that just make us want to invest effort. But let me give you another frame for you that might be helpful. Okay. Maybe I'll pose it as a prompt for you to sort of like ponder. How could you tap your maker impulse to increase the nurturing effect to those around you through the process of creation?
Oh, man.
Because then you can tether the impulse that fills you up to that thing, and then all of a sudden it can really change the experience for you.
Man, I don't know, because my first thought is it's kind of a collaboration type answer to let them come alongside and make with me. Though I'll admit you actually talk about collaboration in there as well. It was really interesting to me. I was underlining it. I really need to chew on it more, because collaboration to me, whatever, if we're in a team, I want to find out, okay, what's my thing? And then let me do it autonomously. I don't want to partner with that. So that now you help me with the answer there, or the concept with how to do that, how to nurture as a maker.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting intersection there. How can I tap that impulse to help those I care about feel seen, heard, understood, and lifted?
I need to dig into that. I mean, that's one. I mean, in all truth, to be candid, I think there's one of the rubs with my wife. Her primary is nurture. That's my heaviest. So how do we? Yeah, probably collaborate is a good word. I mean, obviously, you can't cover this in one show here. And doing the assessment is key. I've got the book here, and I actually took it home last night. And so with my family and kids, we're going to go through and talk about it. And that's probably going to be a primary one for me to talk with them about, is how that's fleshing out, how I can do a better job, how we can align better, because we are a team and a business in essence.
Yeah. And also I think it's probably also a good thing to note that just because something is your anti-sparketype doesn't necessarily let you off the hook. It doesn't mean that it's not a part of the thing that you've signed up to do, whether it's through values, to take care of those around you that you love, or like a broader commitment to culture or society or to equality, that there's some things that you do simply because it's value aligned and it feels like it's the right thing to do. And you just figure out ways to take care of yourself so that you replenish yourself when you do that, because it's just going to take a bit more out of you.
And I'm grateful for this. I have not been as wowed by anything in such a long time, Jonathan. So
that's so nice to hear.
There's my encouragement. How's that? That wasn't hard at all, because it was just honest. I'm literally eager to continue digging in, and honestly, even for personal coaching and consulting that I'm doing, I want people to take this. It speaks to me on a more a level that I understand more than a lot of the personality types, in all honesty, because I've done so many of those. I've seen them. I've had less ability to take those and overlay those on literal action and like this, on what you're doing, what's going to provide fulfillment, which is what I care about for myself and for others. And this feels like one of the most applicable things I've ever done. So, man, thank you for the years of work. Thank you that even as you love to create things, you're sticking with this one still and putting your effort in. I'm eager to learn more. I'll probably have more questions to throw at you, and we'll be driving people to get the book and take the assessment. And I want to engage with more people who are doing this and talk about it more. So thanks for what you've done. Thanks for taking the time and being here today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us for this discussion. That, again, is Jonathan Fields. You can take the test that we talked about here for free, sparketype.com, SPARKETYPE.com, and find Jonathan wherever you're listening to this show right now, at his podcast at the Good Life Project. And again, as you hear this information, if you want guidance and actually applying it to your life, I'd be happy to help guide you to finding the right guide. Email me, kmiller@kevinmiller.co. Till next time, here's to the evolving you.
Yeah.